So then came a critical volume hypothesis, which I have referred back. That is in 1973, Miller proposed the critical volume hypothesis, which was based that there is a lipid solubility required, there is a pressure reversal effect of the anesthesia, and he postulated that anesthesia occurs only when the membrane volume expands beyond a critical amount. And he even figured out that how much increase is there, and he found out that there has to be 1.1% increase. So changes in the volume of the membrane might be causing, because they are saying that there is a volume expansion of the membrane, and that might be leading to a pressure or a compression of the ion channel. And due to the compression of the ion channel, the functions of the neuronal cell, especially depolarization, might be getting affected. Not only that, but that is causing increase in the thickness. And when the thickness of the neuronal membrane is increased, the neuronal excitability by changing the potential gradient across the membrane may get altered. And hence, since the excitability is altered, there may be a depression or anesthetic effect. Then came a phase transition theory, which speculated that when there is a membrane excitation due to the ionic channel excitation, which is a protein, when it undergoes a conformational changes, it increases the lateral dimensions of the protein, it opens the ion channel. Normally, the membrane lipid near the ionic channel exists in a fluid state, and it goes into a compact gel state during the depolarization. There might be a small increase in the membrane fluidity, large decrease in the lateral compressibility of the bilayer, which might be preventing the conformational changes in the ionic channel, and due to which there might be an inhibition of the excitation. And that is how they propose that anesthetics are enhancing the disorders across the membrane by increasing a conversion of a fluid form to the gel ratio, and therefore interfering with the ability of the channels to open and to close, and thereby hampering the depolarization. And therefore this theory was termed as a phase transition theory. Now, as I told you that the theory which was always referred and was found to be more valid was a Mayer-Overton theory, and those findings have led to the general theory that anesthetics are dissolving into the lipid fraction, therefore they are altering the physiological properties. And then there were the various modern variations of the lipid theory which were related to the properties of the neuronal membrane, which might be responsible for anesthesia, which we already discussed, like volume expansion or the lateral surface pressure, alteration in the membrane fluidity or thickness, or alteration in the surface tension effects. But the truth is that your drug has to be a lipid soluble to bring about all these effects. So if there is alteration in the membrane lipid, it might then change the activity and the function of integral proteins, which are usually the ion channels, and thereby they might be inducing anesthesia. Even certain lipid theories postulated indirect mechanisms for occurrence of anesthesia or narcosis. But the main drawback of all these models lies in the observation that anesthetic concentration which is required to produce those changes in the membrane lipid properties might be highly toxic to the organism, because they are always saying that there has to be a critical concentration, there has to be a critical volume, and that concentration might be highly toxic to the organism. So then there came another theory which was a macromolecular water interface theory, which says that many of the gas phases species that exhibit anesthetic properties, they are forming a crystalline hydrates. Pauling was the one who proposed that there are the hydrated anesthetic gas molecules, which he termed as a clathrate formation, and they are stabilizing a membrane, or they occlude the essential pores, and because the pores are occluded, it is interfering with the depolarization. And then came Miller, who postulated that there may be an interaction between the water molecule and anesthetic molecule, and that might be leading to certain, you know, formation of an iceberg because the water molecule is interfering, and because of the conversion of the water to the iceberg, it might be stiffening up the membrane, and once the neuronal membrane becomes hard or it becomes stiff, then that might be preventing the transmission of the neuronal impulses. And anesthetic gas molecules might then occupy a structure determining cavity sites with dynamic ice-like liquid water clusters. This was proposed and was named as a macromolecular water interface theory. But limitations of this theory was neither clatrate nor iceberg can be formed in ambient pressure, or and especially the temperature of our body, which is 37 degree. The typical gas clathrate hydrates are not stable also under physiological pressure and these temperature condition. And additional factors were considered that could increase the clathrate stability in the physiological environment. So it's not only that you need to consider if really there is a clathrate formation, that then there must be some additional factors which might be involved in the clathrate which were not considered during his hypothesis. And then came the protein theory in 19th century, which was a remarkable finding in 1993 by the Franks and Lieb, that there are soluble proteins. This was a good model for anesthetic action, represented as a key advance in the field. And they found out that there was a detailed analysis of the anesthetic luciferase interactions, which led to the suggestion that there is anesthetic molecules which compete with the substrate luciferin molecules for binding to the hydrophobic pockets of the proteins. It is now thought that it may be ion channels or the neurotransmitter receptor sites which might be formed from the protein complexes which get embedded into a neuronal cell membrane, and that might be acting as a primary sites for the anesthetic action. Even there was a discovery of certain stereospecificity for certain anesthetics, and even the specificity for certain optical isomers which are equally soluble in the liquid, and they have supported a protein-based theory of a anesthetic action. Opiates, we can find out that if there is an action of the opiates, which are narcotic analgesic, they have a sedative effect. So opiates, their action, if you want to terminate, we can antagonize their effect by naloxone. Or if we want to terminate the effect of the benzodiazepine, it can be antagonized by flumazenil. Even non-depolarizing muscle relaxant effect like T2-pecurarin or the pancuronium can be antagonized by neostigmine or the edrophenium. So all these examples indicate that all of these drugs which are used as additive drugs with anesthetic, they are producing their mechanism or they are producing their effect by acting on a particular protein termed as a receptor. And because their effects are getting blocked by certain antagonists, that means these effects are reversible and are mediated through a receptor or are mediated through certain protein. Therefore, in theory, it is possible to antagonize IV anesthesia induced by a combination of opiate, benzodiazepine and muscle relaxant by giving a combination of various antagonists which I have mentioned earlier, which proves that yes, there is not only dissolution of the general anesthetic into a lipid layer, but there are certain sites on which general anesthetics are acting and are producing certain effects. It's not only because of the volume expansion or a reversal of a pressure or the disruption of the cell membrane fluidity, but there are certain specific sites, proteins, ion channels or receptors which are located across the hydrophobic domain of the cell membrane and which are targeted by the general anesthetics. No effective antagonist for inhalation anesthesia has been reported so far. And therefore, this does not mean that anesthesia cannot be brought about by a receptor site. A further research is required. Inhalation anesthetics may simply act at several receptors, not necessarily only on one receptor, which differ in their pharmacodynamic properties, And therefore, if you have to reverse inhalation general anesthesia, you might need several different antagonists which have not yet been found out. What we just now discussed, opiates, benzodiazepine, they are all IV or not given by inhalation route, they are non-inhalation, and they have a specific antagonist. But when we talk about inhalation anesthetic, if these non-inhalation anesthetics are also producing the anesthetic effect by acting on the protein, inhalation anesthetic also might be producing their effect by acting on the hydrophobic domain of the protein, but not necessarily only on a one domain. They might be acting on a multiple domains. So if we have to antagonize the effect of the inhalation anesthetic, might be a combination of the antagonists might be required, which needs to be studied. So the recent theories are that there is a neurophysiological theory which suggests that synapses might be a site of the action. Now here comes the difference between a local anesthetics and the general anesthetic. For general anesthetic, the site of the action is synapses. For local anesthetic, the mode of the action is disturbance in the conduction of the impulses. It is not acting, local anesthetics do not work across the synapses. They work across axonal membrane. They work across a conduction of the impulses. Whereas the general anesthetic are acting across the transmission of the impulses from one neuron to the other neuron. And that is what exactly the neurophysiological theory is suggesting, that the synapses are likely to be the site of the action of the general anesthetic. Increase in the synapses increases the anesthetic sensitivity. So changes may be happening across the calcium permeability. We all know that there has to be an entry of the calcium to cause the release of a neurotransmitter. So there may be a change in the calcium permeability at a susceptible synapses. There may be a decreased release of a neurotransmitter. The inhalation anesthetics might be affecting the membrane structure and decreasing the ability of the sodium channels to open up. So these were the more acceptable theories or the hypotheses which were proposed. But limitations is that they do not explain how this must be happening. Yeah, there might be a change in the calcium permeability, there might be a decrease in the neurotransmitter level, there might be a changes in the membrane structure which might be altering the sodium channel depolarization, but nobody explains how this is happening. There are changes in the EEG in man and they differ widely for different anesthetic, which suggests that yes, there are multiple sites of the action. Only an anatomical description rather than the molecular expression it is giving. It is only giving us the anatomical. Yes, there are going to be changes across the membrane. There are going to be the changes across the calcium ion channel. There are going to be the changes across the sodium. But what molecular expressions are altering, those are not explained by the neurophysiological theories. There is another parallel theory which is a biochemical theory which says that volatile agents, they might be inhibiting certain biochemical processes of the cell such as mitochondrial respiration in a reversible manner or maybe in the concentration dependent manner, and they may be producing certain biochemical effects like alteration in the flux of calcium across the mitochondria or the influx of the calcium across the neuronal membrane, or they might be causing increase in the concentration of the GABA aminobutyric acid, which is a depressant neurotransmitter in the synaptic area, might be by inhibiting the degradation of the GABA and therefore producing a modulatory effect of the anesthetic. So there may be certain biochemical alterations like alteration in the mitochondrial respiration, therefore oxygen deprivation might be taking place, or there might be change in the entry of the calcium, or there might be change in the release of the GABA, might be the GABA levels in the synapse are increasing because their degradation by particular enzyme is getting attenuated. So these are all theories which are referring to biochemical phenomena. Where there is a molecular and cellular theories which are defined as those theories which are based on the mechanism of the anesthetic at molecular level, at a cellular level, and that has been proposed. So what might be happening at a cellular level to get a state of a general anesthesia, And everybody or many theories or many scientists propose that at cellular level, it must be the activity of the GABA A receptor which might be playing a vital role or a key role, and maybe the perhaps maybe the only component involved in inducing the anesthesia by these inhalation anesthetic agent. And we all know that GABA is coupled with a chloride ion channel, and therefore it might be happening that the GABA A receptor is getting activated. But even if we look at the various theories and the various findings, then we find that whatever anesthetics are acting on the GABA A receptor, not necessarily they are acting at a site where exactly the GABA goes and binds. You will find that benzodiazepine has its unique binding site, barbiturate has their own binding site, and so on. Even the alcohol has its own binding site across the GABA. So they are not binding at a site at which exactly the GABA goes and binds and activates the GABA receptor and leads to the opening of the chloride channel. So these anesthetic agents have their own unique binding site, but yes, no doubt, there is a role of the GABA A receptor. There is an opening of the chloride channel, either directly or indirectly. Directly like barbiturate, which directly open the chloride ion channel, or indirectly like benzodiazepine, which goes and bind to its binding site and increases the ability of the GABA to bind to the receptor and open chloride channel, and therefore producing the depressant effect. So these theories were referring to that effect of the GABA. But still, exactly at a site where inhalation anesthetic might be binding, or it may be one of the mode of action of general anesthetic, is not proved. Then there were certain genetic studies where genetic manipulation of the animals increasingly used for investigational links between the potential target of anesthesia and their behavioral effects. There were screening for mutations in the fruit flies and nematodes which identified strain with altered sensitivity to anesthetic. But its applicability to the human is always questionable. The introduction of specific mutant into a native gene, which is termed as a knock-in, enables assessment of the physiological and pharmacological role of specific proteins. And when these studies were performed, the method provided evidence for involvement of the beta 2 and beta 3 subunit of the GABA A receptor. That's what I just now discussed with you. That it is not a binding site of GABA, there are some other subunits which are involved. There may be involvement of the beta 2 and beta 3 subunit of the GABA A receptor background, leading to the leak potassium channels, and because of these leak potassium channels, there may be immobility, sedation, and hypnosis. So it has highlighted that it's a GABA A beta subunit which are partially responsible for this volatile anesthetic action and might be a crucial for IV anesthetic agent like propofol or etomidate. These genetic studies were performed on Drosophila, and even they point to the voltage gated sodium channel might be also getting affected with anesthetic agent. So from all these theories, now when we talk about the genetic studies, we realize that now we are identifying a cellular targets where exactly the general anesthetic, volatile anesthetics might be going and acting. Now the picture is becoming more clear. No doubt it was a GABA A receptor, but was a GABA A receptor same subunit was involved of the GABA A receptor? Not necessarily. It might be the other subunit. So they found out which is this subunit. It was a beta subunit. In beta subunit, which specific beta subunits might be involved? There might be beta 2 and beta 3 subunits which are not linked with the chloride, but they might be linked with the leakage of the potassium channel, and that might be responsible for producing the immobility, sedation, and hypnosis. So we cannot rely only on a one theory. There may be integrated theories of a general anesthesia, that several components of the general anesthesia need to be studied independently and may provide an integrating basis for the explanation of the anesthesia which is caused by volatile anesthetics. So student, up to here we have discussed about the various theories which were proposed, but no theory has been able to exactly explain us how general anesthetics are working. I started right from a primitive theory saying colloidal formation up to the lipid solubility, change in the cell permeability, clathrate formation, phase transition, and then coming to the molecular theories, biochemical theories, and then coming to the cellular theories, which made the picture more clear that there is an involvement of a major receptors like a protein theory which state that GABA receptors. Then came the genetic theories which said that it's a GABA B subunit. In B subunit there are beta 1 and beta 2 and beta 3 subunits, and now it is becoming more clear that okay, there is a specific domain, there is a specific ion channel, there is a specific receptor, there are hydrophobic domains across the lipid bilayers which are getting targeted by the anesthetic. The question arises, is it the only target? Not possibly not. The EEG results are saying no, it's not the only target. There may be more than one target which might be involved in exerting the anesthesia, which needs to be still elucidated. So when a question comes that what is the mechanism of general anesthetic, till today we have to explain all theories for explaining the mechanism of action of general anesthetics. And that is why when the question comes in a question paper that explain mechanism of action of general anesthetic, you will have to explain all these theories. To make your answer more easy to write and complete it within a stipulated period, what I suggest to you is again the same thing which I have been always telling you, that when the answers are lengthy, you put them into a chart form, in a table form. You put all these theories in a tabular form. The first will be the name of a theory, the second will be what it is proposing, and third will be its limitation. So 3 columns will be there in your table, and then you can complete that entire answer within maybe 6 minutes or the 5 minutes. Am I clear to this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
ma'am.
So moving ahead, we have already understood now about the various theories which have been proposed, and I know that it is a bit complicated to understand. You may need a revision of it. So I will put my YouTube link of this lecture so that you can again listen to that lecture and you will try to, understand those theories more in detail. Now we move on to the next important factor of the chapter, and that is factors controlling effect of inhalation anesthetics. As we are talking about inhalation anesthetic, they are going to be gases, and therefore whatever are the laws of gases which will govern the effect of the inhalation anesthetic in our body. The first law is Boyle's law, which states that volume of the gas is inversely proportional to the pressure of the gas. Thus, if you increase the pressure, it will reduce the volume of the gas. If it is reducing, or it is volume of the gas is getting reducing with the increasing pressure, then you have to control pressure in a such a way that there is a sufficient volume of the gas reaching to the brain to induce anesthesia, because it's a critical concentration which is required to induce anesthesia. What does the Dalton's law say? That the pressure of a mixture of gases is equal to the sum of individual pressure of a gas exerted. Now, whenever the anesthesia, inhalation anesthesia is given to the patient, it won't be a single gas. Even if I am giving a nitrous oxide, I won't give only the nitrous oxide, I'll combine it with oxygen and some other gas. So it's always going to be a mixture of the gases. So we have to make use of this Dalton's law, because when you are using a mixture of the gases, then the pressure of the mixture of the gas is equal to the sum of individual pressure of the gases. Hence, if there is a greater the concentration of the anesthetic agent present in the inhaled air, then only if there is going to be a greater its partial pressure. So when you are using mixture of gases, you have to see to it that your main ingredient, that is the inhalation or a volatile general anesthetic, its concentration never comes down to the concentration of the other gases which you are mixing with it. It has to be always greater than that of the other gases which are going to get mixed, so that it will have a greater concentration in the inhaled air, and therefore it will exert a greater partial pressure. We'll come to the partial pressure. Why partial pressure is very important? Because that will only determine the pressure, you can say, gradient, and pressure gradient will only determine the transfer of the gases from one compartment to the other compartment, which we already discussed, that there are two compartments through which the inhalation anesthetic have to pass, one from the alveolar air into the circulation, and then from the circulation into the brain, and obviously that is going to governed by the partial pressure exerted by the gas, and that is why the partial pressure becomes an important factor, and which is ultimately determined by the concentration of that general anesthetic present in the inhaled air, and that is why Dalton's law become important when you are deciding the ratio and proportions of the various gases which need to be mixed together while giving general anesthesia. And then we are coming to the Henry's law, which state that at constant temperature the solubility of the gas in a liquid is proportional to its pressure. Now why we are referring to a liquid? Our general anesthetic has to pass from the alveoli into the blood, which is a liquid connective tissue. 95% of it is a water. So at constant temp, and when a gas is moving from alveoli into the blood, the solubility of the gas is going to determine the partial pressure exerted by the gas. So again Henry's law become important because it states that at constant temperature, whatever is going to be our body temperature, the solubility of the gas in a liquid is proportional to its pressure. Thus, if there is a greater partial pressure present in the mixture of anesthesia, the greater is going to be the solubility into the blood. And greater the solubility into the blood, the faster is going to be the transfer of the drug from the alveoli into the blood. I hope up to here clear. Now moving to the next, Graham's law of diffusion. What does it say? That a rate of diffusion of gases are inversely proportional to the square root of densities of the gases. We are interested for our gas to diffuse, for our inhalation gas or a general anesthetic, gaseous general anesthetic, to diffuse from one compartment to the other compartment, we have to refer to this law. What does it say is that rate of diffusion is inversely proportional to the square root of densities. That means lighter the gas or lower the density of the gas, the higher is going to be the rate of the diffusion. In anesthesia, there are three phases: induction, maintenance, and recovery. When we talk about induction, we want a rapid induction. And when we want a rapid induction, we want our inhalation anesthetic to pass, to diffuse rapidly from one compartment to the other compartment. So we can conclude that we can use certain lighter gases for induction and maybe then the other gases for maintenance. So lighter gases will diffuse more rapidly into as well as out of the tissue. Don't forget that if they are diffusing into, they will also diffuse out of the tissue also quickly. So such type of the gases will be preferred for induction, and some other gases which are diffusing slowly will come out also slowly, can be used for maintenance. So here we are using Graham's law of diffusion. Then comes the Fick's law of diffusion, which states that a rate of flow of the gases is proportional to the diffusion coefficient and partial pressure. So we should also know about what is going to be the diffusion coefficient of my gas which I am going to mix while giving anesthesia. The rate of flow of the gas is also, it states that rate of flow of the gas is inversely proportional to the linear distance, which we already know very well. The thinner is going to be the diffusing membrane, the faster is going to be the rate of the diffusion. Thus, the diffusion of the gas takes place from an area with a higher partial pressure to the area with a lower partial pressure. Now you must have understood why I was stressing up of having a high partial pressure of the gas in a mixture. Because the diffusion of the gas will always take place from an area of a higher to the lower. Once the equilibrium is achieved on both the sides, there won't be further transfer of the gases. And that will be determined by the diffusion coefficient. So when we talk about the factors which control the transfer of anesthetic agent from alveoli to blood and from blood to tissues, now which factor become important? The solubility of the agent in the blood, do you agree? Because that's what we talked that it's a solubility of the agent in the blood that will determine the partial pressure. And when we are talking about the solubility of the agent in the blood, we should know what is the rate of the blood flow through the lungs and the tissues. The partial pressure of the agent in the arterial and obviously the mixed venous blood, at the same time what is going to be the partial pressure of the agent in the tissues, because ultimately the targets are in the tissues, in the brain tissue. Here I have given the example of a diethyl ether which is more soluble in the blood, and partial pressure of the gas controls its diffusion across the alveoli to the blood. Thus, more of the diethyl ether concentration is required to be dissolved in the blood to raise the partial pressure, because it has a good solubility in the, it is more soluble in the blood. Because it is more soluble in the blood, it takes a longer time to achieve a desired partial pressure. Diethyl ether will take a longer time to induce anesthesia. I hope this example makes very clear in your mind that how the partial pressure is related to diffusion and how the solubility is affecting the partial pressure, and therefore the selection of the general anesthetic for a required purpose depends on all these factors. I cannot select diethyl ether as an inducing agent because I know its solubility in the blood is high. It will take a time to achieve a desired partial pressure, and therefore it will take a time to diffuse from one compartment to other, and it will take a longer time to induce anesthesia.